Hello everyone and welcome to the Crowcast Preview. I'm your host Scorpus and with me tonight on the cast is Macca. First time on the Crowcast. How are you doing tonight?
Very good, thanks Scorpus, and good evening to one and all.
Yeah, it's good to have you on board. Phoenix has taken a little bit of a break to take his daughter to a recital or something like that, so wish him all the best. Just want to quickly say thanks to everyone who listens into the Crowcast. Last week's West Coast preview, or it was actually 2 weeks ago now, was the most listened to Crowcast preview, so really happy with that. Really happy with our listeners and everything, so be sure to tell all your friends about us. Give us a like on Facebook and Twitter and all that at BF Crowcast. It's all really appreciated, your listens and support of the Crowcast, so thanks everyone. But for now, we'll be getting into the match preview. Of course, we're live on a Wednesday this week, a little bit different because, of course, we're playing North Melbourne at Adelaide Oval tomorrow night, Thursday night, 7:20pm local time. So, yeah, interesting Thursday night match. Macca, how are you feeling about it?
Well, I was feeling really good about it till I heard the weather. 25 mils of rain forecast and a wind around about 25 to 30 whatever it is, kilometres or whatever they measure the damn thing in. But that's after it's going to ease from 35 to 40. So I don't think it's going to be a really pleasant night.
No. I mean, living here in Melbourne, it's been raining as well a little bit. But I was looking at the forecast just before, and on top of the rain, chance of thunderstorms in the afternoon, evening, apparently. So, yeah, it'll be a real slog down at Adelaide Oval. We'll just quickly go through the teams before talking a little bit more about the weather and everything. Coming in, we've got Brad Crouch. He's back after his little stint in the SANFL. Unfortunately, though, coming out, Paul Seedsman. He has got a 2 to 3 week hamstring injury. Disappointing for him, I think. He's been pretty good for us over the opening rounds. For North Melbourne, coming in, they've got two big ins for them. Their captain, Andrew Swallow, as well as Cunnington. Coming out, Wells and McDonald. So 2 big ins, 2 big outs. And they have got a ton of people missing from their team compared to the team that played us in round 1. Waite, Wells, Wright, McDonald, Higgins, and Garner all played round 1, but they're all injured at the moment. So they're definitely not at full strength at the moment, whereas we're, I guess, almost at full strength. Of course, that last match, round 1, 2016, at Etihad Stadium, we probably went in a bit short without Hardigan, and we led at every change, but the lack of discipline at the end led us to lose the match by 10 points, unfortunately. Waite and Harvey each kicked 3 goals, whereas Jenkins had 5 goals. Do you think this will be a repeat of the round 1 match, Macca, or do you think we've gone in with a bit of a better team and our home ground advantage? Will that help us a bit on Thursday?
Well, yes, it definitely will. I mean, I think we're undefeated at this ground, or did we get done? I can't remember now.
Against Geelong we got done, but that's it.
That's right. After I made my statement, I thought, I think we have got done. So, but overall, we played very, very well at Adelaide Oval, and I think that we've got a very balanced side at the moment, and even without the Seed not playing, and it is unfortunate about Seeds because these last 2 games have been crackers.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the criticisms that his previous coach had of him was the fact that he didn't chase enough, didn't tackle enough, didn't go in hard enough, and off memory, I think he had 10 tackles last game. So, you can't ask for more than Seeds was doing. So we will miss him, but there's been, like everybody else, I've been a bit of a G for Crouchy coming back into the side, and absolutely delighted to see that, because I think we talk about the weather, and there'll be obviously lots of scrimmages, and there'll be a lot of stuff going on in tight, and I think that will suit Brad. So it's a good game for him to come back into, I think. From a North Melbourne point of view, the weather won't actually play into their hands. They normally play tools and an accurate kicking game and trying to kick those tools. And I think the weather helps us in that respect, because we don't mind a decent scrap. And I think in the last game that we played, we weren't going too well. All of a sudden we turned the game into a scrap, and then eventually got hold of the game and went on to win it. So I think the weather does go in our favour, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I tend to agree as well with the North's big forward line, their main advantage is really their marking and leading tools. Of course, they've got Brown up there, who's their main contested marker, and Waite, he's probably another guy who likes to take the marks up forward. So our forward line's a little bit more diverse. I don't think the only guy who's taking contested marks is McGovern, and I mean Walker's a lead-up player too, but we know Jenkins can almost play as a small forward at times. Lynch, he's got his huge tank, he gets all over the place. We've got gun small forwards, Betts and Cameron. So I think we have the advantage up there. And in the middle, I was actually looking at some stats just before we went on air, and I thought North Melbourne were a stronger contested ball side than us, but it turns out that they're actually pretty average when it comes to contested possessions and clearances, whereas we are above average in both of those stats. So, yeah, if it does come down to a hard-fought slog in the centre, I think we have the personnel through the middle to really challenge them. And I think the addition of Brad Crouch is really going to help through there because he's been in pretty good form in the SANFL. It's great to see him back, as you mentioned. And the one thing that he was doing really well before he was omitted from the side was his tackling pressure. He wasn't necessarily, getting his disposals as well as we knew that he could, but he was applying a lot of pressure around the centre. What about Sloan, Macca? He's a wet weather player. How important is he going to be on Thursday?
Well, I love Sloaney. He gives 100%, no matter whether we're winning, whether we're losing. He just puts his body on the line, and he will go very, very well in this weather. He goes well in any weather, but it'll be the type of weather and the type of game where you're gonna have to put your body in and get the ball. And nobody does it any better than Sloaney. He goes in very, very hard, and no matter what knocks he gets up again and he just has another crack. And he'll have a big influence on the game. They are fortunate they've got their two mids coming in, because without those two mids, I was thinking we're going to win very, very comfortably. On the other side of it, they've lost Wells, who's been a lovely distributor of the ball, and he's been getting plenty of it as well. And they've also lost a very good backman as well. So, they got two good ins, but two very bad outs for them.
Yeah, Wells is a really significant loss for them, I reckon. He was on fire in the game last weekend against the Hawks. He had, I think, 30 touches, despite having a little bit of an injury concern throughout the match. So, yeah, Daniel Wells has been in fantastic form for North Melbourne this year, and he's a really big loss. Yeah, of course, the rest of North Melbourne's midfielders, apart from Swallow and Cunnington, they've got guys like Zeeble and Del Santo who are pretty handy, but yeah, they're just their depth players. Guys like Mackenzie, Gibson, Farron Ray, who's apparently managing to still play games. All those guys, I don't think they really stack up to our lower tier midfielders like, your Jared Lyons, your Rory Atkins, those sort of players. What do you think, Macca?
Well, the blokes you mentioned for us that are the regarded as the second stringers, they're blokes that will go very, very hard for the ball. And in fact, the criticism of our midfield, if there has been one, always has been the fact that we don't have enough outside mids, so to receive the ball when it comes out. So I think we'll outwork them. Zeeble is actually a very good inside mid, and he's also a very good physical mid. So he likes hurting people, and he goes in very hard for the ball. I've got a lot of time for him, but we've got more than one like him. We've got probably three or four. So a couple of their mids are ones that hang on the outside, and we have to be very careful of that to make sure we have somebody on the outside to cover that as well. But I think that, I'd pretty well back us to get first use of the ball.
Exactly. I mean, with Tomo and Matty Crouch in there, adding in, Brad Crouch, who's, we know he's really good at contested possessions and lines. That's four guys who will be really gunning it in the midfield. What about Richard Douglas, though? How have you seen his form over the past couple of weeks?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Douglas, because a lot of people, I don't post very much these days on Big Footy, but I read a lot, and there's been a lot of criticism of Douglas saying he's not doing this and he's not doing that. But the coach is happy with him, and the reason for that is everybody used to say, whatever you want to call it, the run with guy, the cooler, And
tagger,
everybody used to
yeah.
no, everybody used to avoid that word, the tagger. They used to think of all these other fancy names, but the tagger is very, very much back in business, and that's what Douglas is doing for us. I think that if you look at some big name players that he's played on, he's kept them to very, very modest contributions. Admittedly, his own contribution has been modest in terms of numbers of kicks and handballs, but it's been quite a good contribution in terms of the influence of the game.
Yeah, and he was playing a half-forward role against West Coast, and some of the things he was pretty impressive in some of his aspects of his game. I think his contested marking, which in that particular match was something I'd never really seen from Douglas before, and I was pretty impressed with him there. And he seems to, when he's playing up forward, he manages to get a couple of shots on goal every game. Whether or not he's particularly accurate is, another question entirely. But he's working in that forward zone pretty well. I think it's just his midfield contributions, whether he's tagging or not. I mean, sometimes he's been tagging, to be fair. It just seems like when it's his task or his turn to get the ball in the centre, that he's not at that same level as our Sloanes and Tomos and Matty Crouch players. And he does seem a little bit, out of character for Douglas compared to, his yellow jacket or golden jacket season from a couple of seasons ago. But yeah, I think the coaches are definitely backing him in to see whether, he can regain some of that confidence throughout the middle, especially, Brad Crouch is coming back in, so we couldn't really drop Douglas considering Paul Seedsman had to go out. So he's probably the guy that's most on the chopping block in my opinion. But if he's playing his role, if he's doing exactly what the coaches are asking him to do, then he'll probably stay in the side for a fair bit longer. What about the whipping boy, David McKay? Have you seen him?
Yeah, he gets some lashes, doesn't he? I've actually got a bit of time for David Mackay, whatever he wants to be called. But I think he's performed very well this year by his own standards, admittedly, but at least at the standard necessary to hold his position. That he's actually and if you look at the stats of the number of yards gained in a game, he's actually been usually about our second or third at worst player in that respect. So I think he's added a little bit of dash and run to the side. He's obviously been told there's a lot of things of his game that he had to fix up, and one of them was to be a lot more physical than he was because he was powder puff stuff and he was getting knocked off the ball very easily. But if you look at the number of tackles, they're certainly there, and also the number of yards that he gains in the game. I think he's playing a very good role at the moment.
Yeah, he's a really interesting player in that earlier in the season, we were playing McKay in a sort of a weird inside midfielder role, but not really a contested ball winner. It was a very odd position for him. But I think this week in particular, with Seedsman coming out, that David McKay can really return to the place that I think he performs best, which is a pure wingman. He's not very good in defence, which is where we played him last season or prior to now, which is good. If we never see McKay in defence, that's good. And yeah, I agree that some of his defensive pressure has been pretty good. I think it's really interesting because, in my opinion, I think Roy Atkins has almost surpassed David McKay in some of the things that McKay provides to the team are sort of very similar to what Atkins is providing as well. Atkins had a down game last week, so hopefully he can pick up a little bit this week. It'll be interesting to see where McKay plays, and I reckon it's probably the wing for him. Did you watch the game against Hawthorn on Friday night with North Melbourne, Macca?
Yeah, certainly did.
Yeah, what did you make of it? How did you see North Melbourne's performance?
Well, it's something that I hadn't really ever associated with North before, and they were very, very physical, and their intention was, and it did nearly work, was to rough Hawthorn up and get them to lose concentration on the ball and affect their skills. And it nearly worked, but not quite. And I'm expecting them to do the same to us on tomorrow night.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that they did in the round one game that caused us to be a little bit undisciplined. I noticed in that particular game in round one, we had a couple of guys giving away silly free kicks, silly 50 metres that resulted in goals. We really need to not get sucked into those tactics that they used against Hawthorn on Friday because, we're not a particularly physical team, not in the same way that your Hawthorn or North Melbourne is, but they seem to be thinking that their tactics in the physical department are working for them, And we just, like Brodie Smith said in his press conference today, that they just need to not get sucked into those sort of issues. And yeah, it could be an interesting one though, because we know that they've got some pests in their side, like Tomo down in defence, or Scott Thompson for North Melbourne down defence for Rito. What about up forward with Lindsay Thomas? How many free kicks for head high do you reckon he's going to get?
Well, I did watch the North Melbourne Hawthorn game, and I don't think he actually got as many as he deserved for once. He normally cultivates the game, the free kicks by dropping the knees and ducking the head. The incident that caused all the trouble with the misreporting to Scott, and then Scott making a fool of himself about the whole issue. But Lindsay Thomas was in a stranglehold around his neck, and he didn't get a free.
Yeah, I agree. It should have been a free kick, at least under the current interpretations of the rules. Of course, Brad Scott couldn't resist firing up a little bit over the umpires in his press conference, got him into, what did he get, like a $30,000 fine or something for his comments, which is huge. But yeah, Lindsay Thomas, he's been... We seem to be able to curb him pretty well with Luke Brown in the past, so I think Luke Brown will definitely get the job on him this week. How about the other matchups? Who do you see going to who in their forward line?
Well, firstly, just on Thomas, I reckon it's a certainty that Brown will go on to him, because Luke Brown's a gun. A lot of people don't give him the full credit that he deserves. If you look at his record this year and the top players that he's played on, he has kept them to absolutely bugger all. He's done a great job. It's really a bit hard now with the weather as it's going to be. It's not going to be as quite as important to match up as they would. And I'm assuming a very, very wet ball here. But if it's dry enough to mark the ball, Ben Brown at the moment he's their major forward, actually taking the marks. If you have a look at the stats on the situation, Brownie has come a long, long way in the last few weeks, and the other guys are sort of just playing second fiddle to Brown.
Yeah, he's probably the one to stop at the moment. I think he's probably a better matchup for someone like a Kyle Hartigan, just considering his size, and he seems to have a little bit of pace in him too, which is good for a big guy like him. So Hartigan on Brown probably, and I think Talia, he's absolutely destroyed Drew Petrie in the past. So yeah, hopefully Talia will do a job on him again. What about Todd Goldstein in the ruck? He's been out of form a little bit in recent times, but Jacobs hasn't been the best either. Who do you see winning the ruck battle?
Yeah, that's my one and only concern. Goldstein has done very well against us in the past. He's just that little bit taller than Jacobs, and Jacobs isn't getting a long way off the ground at the moment. And if Jacobs can sort of neutralise him to the point where at least he can't dish it out cleanly to running players going past, or players that have got themselves into a position where they're not being guarded. Because if you watch Goldstein, he's a masterly ruckman. I enjoy watching him if he's not playing us. And I think Jacobs his main role is to not only match him in the ruck, but also follow him around the ground as well, because Goldie gets a lot of the ball around the ground as well. I've got a very big opinion of him, and I know that his last couple haven't been as good as they should be, but he does seem to pour it on against us, and he can have a big influence on the game. So Jacobs has to really work very, very hard and make sure that Goldstein doesn't become a driving force for them.
And he was certainly a driving force in the last match. I mean, he had 44 hit-outs and some really crucial contested marks in that last quarter to sort of stem the flow and help North Melbourne secure their victory. Whereas Jacobs, I mean, 35 hit-outs, is nothing to complain about, but he wasn't as effective as around the ground. So yeah, I think that's Jacobs' real strength against Goldstein, is if he can get him around the ground. I mean, it's not going to be the ideal condition for someone of his height or of Goldstein's height, but it'll definitely be a crucial battle. The final thing that I wanted to touch on just a little bit is the fact that, of course, we're coming off the bye week. We've had a pretty significant break since we last played on Sunday, or Saturday last week, or 2 weeks ago, sorry. Whereas, of course, North Melbourne, they've got a 6-day break. Is this going to be a factor, do you reckon?
Well, if it gets down to a real slogfest, you would hope so, because of the fact that our blokes, any bruises and knocks should have been fixed up by now to the point they should be feeling like they're jumping out of their skin and ready to go. Whereas North Melbourne, they've had hard games, and their last game in particular against Hawthorn, very, very physical game, and which they initiated themselves, but and it probably would have been a reasonably physical game, but they turned into a very hard game. And with a 6-day turnaround, you would think that, you can argue they're match hardened and all the rest of it, and they probably are, but when the chips are down and when it comes down to who's got the most legs, surely you'd hope that we have the most legs.
Oh, I would definitely think that we would have the most legs to run out a game in better condition. I mean, we've had, 11, 12 days break, I think. So, yeah, it's we'll definitely should have the legs in the last quarter, whereas they could run out of steam. But it's interesting because the opposite thing happened in round 1. We kind of ran out of steam a little bit at Etihad Stadium, so maybe they have superior fitness overall. Who knows? We'll see when it comes to Thursday night, tomorrow night. So, who do you see winning? What do you reckon will the margin be, and who's best on ground, do you reckon?
Well, my original forecast in the drive was that we'd win by 4 to 5 goals. Goals might be a little bit harder to come by tomorrow night, but I'll still stick with that same margin. I'm going to still say 4 to 5 goals.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing earlier, that if it was dry, we'd probably get out to a victory of maybe 30 to 40 points, but because it's wet, it definitely changes things a little bit, and maybe a 20-point-ish victory, but I think we definitely have the woods on North Melbourne at home. I mean, they haven't lost to us in Adelaide since round 21, 2003. This was a game that Wayne Carey was playing for the Crows back then, so a long, long time ago was the last time they beat us in Adelaide, and I don't see it happening this week, which is good for us. Nice to get another win, hopefully. And I guess this brings us to a little game section, probably the first time, Macca, that you'll be hearing this, so let's introduce Game of Crows. So I'll just give a quick rundown of Game of Crows for those that might have forgotten over the bye week. This is our prediction game regarding the upcoming Crows match of the week. There's one of two options. You make a bold claim, which is something that hasn't happened this season, for 1 point, or you can go a little bit more crazy, something that hasn't happened ever, in your prediction for 3 points. The winner at the end of the season, with the most points, of course. I will send you a case of beer, as has been the deal right from the start. You can enter through the usual channels: Twitter, Spreaker, comments, Facebook, or Big Footy. And of course, last week, Joel Constable, another point. 1 point for saying that Matt Crouch would have his season-high disposal efficiency. He was very good. I think he had 88% disposal efficiency, so very nice for him. And Bonkers 000, 1 point for saying that small players to kick more than talls. Joel Constable still leading the leaderboard with 4 points. Macca, do you have a prediction for this week? Something that might happen that hasn't happened yet this season?
No, you caught me on the hop there. I'll make a very bold statement. Hardigan won't kick a goal.
Well, has he kicked a goal this season? Wasn't it Talia? It has to be more bold than that.
No, I just cheated a little bit there because I couldn't think of one on the hop.
Well, I'll give you mine then. My one is Brad Crouch to have his season-high disposals. I think he'll come back in ripping form and have at least 24 touches.
Yeah, but that's still not too bold because he didn't get many touches in his last couple of games.
That's true, but that's a sneaky way to get points. I haven't gotten the leaderboard yet. I'm hoping to get some points for that one. You can do something similar.
Okay. I'll make Josh Jenkins will not kick more than 1 goal.
Ooh, now that I'd take that as bold. He's been in very good form against North Melbourne over the games that he's played. It is in the wet, but he likes his Joe the Goose goals. So, yep, I'll give you that one. That is bold. So, yeah, everyone else, get in your tips and predictions and everything. We'll have a little bit more fun in Game of Crows as always. Now, though, we'll move on to our SANFL game this week. Finally, no bye in the SANFL. We're playing Central Districts Saturday 2:10 p.m. at Maimoni House Oval. This is not a televised game, unfortunately, so yeah, no watching it on Channel 7 this time around. Teams actually haven't been announced for this game yet, of course, because it's on Saturday, but the expectation for this match is probably we'll see Miller. He was the travelling emergency to the West Coast game. He'll probably be back in. Nathan Van Berlo will be back with his foot complaint, missed the last match. And coming out, of course, Brad Crouch, the AFL. We're still missing a couple of players. Riley Knight, he's got his ankle injury. Very disappointing for him. He hasn't really fired at all this season after his ripping form last season. Very disappointing for him. Of course, Sam Shaw, horrible concussion. He's been out for a long time now. Wishing him all the best. Curtly Hampton, he's actually rejoined the main training session, so he's just a couple of weeks away. It'll be exciting to see him in the SANFL team in just a couple of weeks. And of course, Paul Seedsman out with his 2 to 3 week injury. Centrals, they've got the same wins as us, but they've played one more game and they actually beat us back in May. Matt, could you see much of the SANFL over in Adelaide?
Very little. I watch so much AFL. I watch every one of the 9 games, and I must admit I don't see very much SANFL at all. So,
who are you excited to see stepping up from SANFL to AFL? Who's your tip for sort of to tear the game apart and really put their hand up?
Well, you mentioned Curtly Hampton there. He won't be playing for a couple of weeks, and he probably won't play any AFL this year, just for his sheer circumstances. But he was a bloke I was very, very excited about that we did recruit, because I used to watch him play with GWS, and I thought, gee, that's an untapped talent there. He needs a little bit of work and a little bit of tidying up in what to do, but God, natural talent, he's got heaps of it. So long term, he's the one that excites me the most there. And Miller, I would look forward to seeing him come back in when he's ready to make a contribution more than, say, a dozen possessions. And I think he'll be a very exciting player next year. And the other one I haven't really seen very much of at all is, and they tell me he goes all right, is young Harry Wigg.
Yeah, I've seen very little SANFL as well, just purely because I live in Melbourne. But yeah, the 1 or 2 matches that I've managed to watch of the SANFL Crows, Wigg has been really solid through the centre. He's probably even pushed above some of our guys from last season, like Grigg in particular. I think Wigg has put in some really good showings to sort of push him above Grigg in contention. He's probably still sitting a little bit behind a player like Cam Ellis-Yolman in the ranks, so it'll be hard for him to push into the team, but we are getting into the part of the season where we're playing those lesser ranked teams, like, we're playing Carlton, we're playing Brisbane, Essendon, in the next couple of rounds. So, yeah, it could be a time to debut Wigg, considering he didn't get an AFL game last season, and he's been putting in some pretty good form. And I think from all reports, he's really taken his transition from small defence into the midfield really well. So it's good to see him shaping up well. So yeah, hopefully we'll see his elite leg in the AFL team soon. As far as the SNFL team goes, I guess with our strengths and everything, Miller coming back in adds a little bit to our pretty stagnant forward line with our huge tools. So I think we might bank a win there, but we won't harp too much on about the SNFL. Let's move to the other AFL matches of this round. And there isn't a whole lot of exciting matches really to discuss. I think our match is probably the game of the round for neutral supporters, but we'll talk a little bit about Collingwood versus Fremantle first. This is the Friday night match at the MCG. Collingwood has been in absolutely awful form, and Fremantle, they've been doing a little bit better, Macca.
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting game. Our game, I think, is undoubtedly the match of the round in terms of quality, but in terms of interest, I think that game will have quite a lot of interest to Fremantle, having won 3 in a row, and they're definitely not. They've demonstrated they're definitely not tanking, and they're really having a crack at redeveloping their side. Collingwood, I think, is it's the mystery side to me. I say that because of the fact that Buckley's been there. Is it 5 years he's been there now?
It could be 4 or 5 years. Yeah, it's been a long time, and it's been a pretty downhill slide.
Well, yeah, the reason I say that is because it's either his fourth or fifth year as coach, and if you have a look at the graph, they're going downhill rather than going up. And I look at and I know they've got into some injuries, but I look at the quality of the players that are taking the field, and I think their performances are way down on what they should be. They've got the type of player they've got out there should be performing a lot better than they are.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, their huge strength has been their midfield, at least in terms of their list profile, and really the only one or two players that I think have been half decent for Collingwood through the midfield has been their new recruit Adam Treloar, who's been fantastic. Scott Pendleby's been pretty respectable as well, and I guess Sidebottom has been there as well, but just some of their other guys, they really haven't been stepping up. Their forward line is a complete shambles. Cloak is useless. They've got a number of injuries up there, which hasn't helped as well. And their defence it's just awful. I mean, it's probably the worst defence in the entire competition, to be honest. Whereas coming into this match, apparently Fremantle, they've only got 28, I think, fit players to choose from. So big injury woes for them. Who do you see winning?
Well, I'm actually going for Freo because of the fact that they've learned how to win in the last few weeks, and Collingwood, I think they're just falling apart now. They'll probably make a fool of me and play a decent game for a change, but if they were racehorses, you'd have to back Freo, and that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think I'll be tipping Fremantle as well. I mean, the only thing I could see helping Collingwood out this round is the fact they had the bye last week along with us, so maybe Buckley's managed to give them a rocket or something so that they can really step up, but I just can't see it happening. They are in shocking form. The other semi-interesting match, I guess, could be GWS versus Carlton at Spotless Stadium. Of course, GWS is very strong at home, but Carlton haven't been as terrible as I thought this season. How do you see this match?
Yeah, I think you've got to give a lot of credit to the Carlton coach. I thought he was going to be a little bit soft because he sounds a little soft and he talks a little soft, but since he's been the coach, I think he's a transformed man. I think he's been quite inspiring to his team. And the one thing I like about Bolton, he demands that they give 100%, and he's not frightened to drop a player if they don't give 100%. Having said that, I have a pretty big opinion of the Giants. They've got some very talented players in their side, and it's going to take a very good side to beat them at home. And I don't think it'll be Carlton, but I do expect Carlton to give them a little bit of bother. They just won't roll over and die. I think they'll put up a pretty good fight, but I think in the end the Giants will be just too good.
Yeah, rolling over and dying is something I think many people were expecting would happen with Carlton this season. But as you said, they're putting in effort and they're really giving it their best. I don't think their best will be good enough against GWS, so I agree with you. I think GWS will win comfortably, but yeah, Carlton have been a bit of a surprise packet this season, I think, along with Melbourne as well. I mean, Melbourne have the bye, but Melbourne have been terrible for ages, and it seems like this season is the season that's really been clicking for them.
Yeah, those two teams, they are the two teams that have come from the depths of despair and starting to look like they might be making a move up the ladder in the long term.
Yeah, which would be really positive for Melbourne supporters in particular, considering they really haven't seen success for the best part of 10 plus years easily. What about any of the other matches this weekend take your fancy? We've got Richmond versus Brisbane Saturday afternoon at the MCG. There's St Kilda versus Geelong Saturday night at Etihad, and Hawthorn versus Gold Coast, the only match on Sunday in Tasmania.
Yeah, they're not quality games in terms of having two quality teams. The Richmond versus Brisbane one, Richmond should win, and they should win it comfortably, and Martin's been fantastic for them in the last few weeks. But, gee, I think I'd cut my wrist if I was a Richmond supporter. Seriously.
Oh, yeah. Every single time it looks like they're coming even slightly good, they go and stuff it up in some way, and yeah, it looked like maybe last season they would finally start pushing up the ladder a little bit more. Maybe they could clinch top 4, which would help them actually win a final for once. But this season they've been really, really disappointing. I think their supporters have really been, through some tough times. Probably not as tough as Melbourne, but definitely disappointing for them. Vardy Magic in the chat says a Brisbane win would be hilarious, and I definitely agree. They're actually surprisingly bad, Richmond, against Gold Coast last week. They managed to clinch the victory in the end, but I assume you watched some of that match, Macca, and yeah, Gold Coast really gave them a run.
Yeah, I watched the game. In fact, if Brisbane hadn't done a couple of stupid things, Gold Coast hadn't done a couple of stupid things, Sorry, hang on. Who was it playing? It was Brisbane and...
Oh, you mean the Brisbane match from last week? It was Brisbane versus West Coast, and
Brisbane played pretty well in that game.
Yeah, I mean they ended up losing by 50 points, I think, but it was a last quarter blowout from memory. So,
last quarter and a half they just blew right out. But they put up a pretty reasonable contest. I got my wires crossed there. I watched so many games in the end, I get them all mixed up. But Richmond are capable of anything, and that's either doing very, very well or being very, very bad. So it's not totally out of the question that Brisbane could win the game, but I don't expect they will. But Richmond are going so bad, they're not even going to get the position of ninthman this year.
Yeah, it's that's probably going to go to Port Adelaide, which will be just hilarious for them. Of course, Port have the bye, so there's nothing to laugh at them about this week, unfortunately. But yeah, not a very compelling round of football, I don't think. A lot of matches against bottom teams or top teams against bottom teams like St Kilda versus Geelong. So yeah, not all that fantastic, but at least the Crows are playing tomorrow night. It'll be very, very exciting.
You do raise a good point there, Scorpus. So if you're going to have the split rounds and have the buys, you'd think that, it's not a draw, it's a fixture. So it's a rigged situation of making the games being whatever you want them to be. You'd think they'd make sure that there were at least a couple of really, really big games each of the 3 weeks to make sure that the interest was maintained.
Yeah, and it really hasn't been the case. I mean, last week we had probably they had 2 standout games, I guess. So we had North Melbourne versus Hawthorn and Western Bulldogs versus Geelong, and both of those were, apart from the blowout in the Geelong game, were, billed to be pretty decent games. This week there's only the one really exciting match, and next week, looking just through the roster, Sydney versus the Western Bulldogs is probably the only really compelling match in that round. I mean, unless you count Melbourne versus Adelaide at the MCG, but they've just scheduled some really poor fixtures. Who really wants to see West Coast versus Essendon on Thursday night? That's just a shocker.
Yeah, that's going to be a bloody ripper, isn't it?
Oh yeah, who's going to turn up and who's going to tune into that one? No. Anyway, I guess that brings us to the end of the Crowcast preview. It's been fantastic to have you on, Macca. Really good chat tonight. So yeah, bit of a different schedule for people, so hopefully we'll get some listens in the recordings in the days to come. Thanks everyone for their support. You can of course follow us throughout all our social platforms. We're on Twitter and Facebook, BF Crowcast there. Give us a like or a follow or whatever. We are on iTunes. That's probably the best place to get our podcasts apart from Spreaker. Give us a review there, follow us and everything, subscribe, do all that good stuff. We'll be back on Sunday for the review cast. There'll be quite a long time between the game and the review cast, hosted by Phoenix. That is live 7 p.m. Adelaide time. And of course the Crowbar, don't forget that. That was on Monday and Tuesday Night Live, recorded just yesterday. Give that a listen as well. All right, I think that wraps us up, Macca. I guess we'll see you later.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Scorpus. And I'll roll in on Sunday night and we'll have a little bit of chat about how the game went and hopefully how we won the game.
Yep, should be a good one, so definitely tune into that. And yeah, I guess that wraps us up. We'll see you later.
Yep, good night all.